How many of us actually look at banks and we visualize them as being these corporate, money hungry entities that are essentially evil? And then on the opposing side, we look at credit unions like they're the member owned, community oriented, nonprofit, for the people type of institution. That's how a lot of us look at banks versus credit unions. However, we may need to look at that in a different context, right? So I'm on politico.com, a credible article. This says credit unions are making money off of people living paycheck to paycheck. There's a new predator making money off of overdraft fees. And he's saying it's credit unions. So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of back and forth from the federal government, financial regulators on the state and federal level, CFPB. Everyone's been pushing and putting pressure on the major retail banks to basically scale back on these junk fees and these overdraft fees to the point where I know Bank of America, they've gone from $35 to I think $10 in overdraft fees. And Capital One, from my understanding, they've removed all overdraft fees from their business model completely, right? So you're seeing a lot of the major retail banks, they're starting to scale back and they're starting to remove or just lower the junk fees and the overdraft fees that they're giving to their customers. But what about the credit unions that are out there? Are these credit unions as innocent as a lot of us paint them out to be? This article says not all of them, right? A lot of these credit unions, they're kind of going under the radar and they're doing a lot of the things that a lot of these major banks are doing, but nobody's talking about it. No one's putting pressure on these credit unions. So let's look at a couple of these. And I just want to read a couple of sentences, as I always do on these type of articles. The first sentence I want to highlight is why credit unions aren't really getting the same sort of scrutiny that a lot of these bigger banks are getting. One of the major reasons for that is credit unions, they are exempt from federal reporting requirements on overdraft fees. So the major banks are required to disclose how much they're charging their customers. Credit unions, they don't really have to do that. But it looks like right now we have information coming out of California to give us a little bit of insight on how these credit unions are charging their customers. And the first report of the data reveals that many California credit unions are taking millions from their most vulnerable customers and spending it on perks and bonuses for execs that resemble those of the big banks more than the nonprofits. So like I said before, we always tend to think that these big banks are the evil, money-hungry corporations and these credit unions are just angels. When we look into the data a little bit more, we find that's not really the case. California's largest state-chartered credit union, Golden One, took $24 million in overdraft from their members, while spending $6 million a year for naming rights on the NBA stadium in Sacramento. Does that justify charging your customers $24 million annually in junk fees, right? Just to get your name on a Sacramento Kings arena. Let me scroll down because this is the one that's even crazier. They took in $252 million in overdraft and non-sufficient funds fees in 2022. 30 credit unions earned half or more of their net profit from overdraft and non-sufficient funds fees alone. Right? So out of the 114 state chartered credit unions based out in California, approximately like a quarter of them, half of their money that they're getting in profit is just junk fees, overdraft fees. How are you an institution in a credit union and half of your profit is just junk fees? These numbers, they're pretty alarming. If you really look at this, it's pretty alarming. If we scroll down a little bit more, it says the data does show some good news. 10% of California state charter credit unions report zero overdraft fees, and just under 20% report fees in the single digits of total earnings. These credit unions show that you don't need to rely on overdraft fees. Again, it is possible for a financial institution to have a flourishing business without charging these insufficient funds fees and these overdraft fees. Capital One is getting rid of their insufficient funds and overdraft fees completely, yet they're still running a profitable business. And the money that they're losing for not charging these fees, they're more than likely going to make up by getting more customer acquisition, because now the branding is a little bit better. Now that we have this information, how many of us are going to remove our businesses from a lot of these predatory type of institutions and move them to either neobanks, fintech companies, Capital One, to institutions that they're not going to charge us these fees. So when we look at banks, when we look at credit unions, I'm guilty of this as well. We've got to move away from just painting every bank or every institution as if they're just like a cartoon character, that every bank is bad, every credit union is good. We got to stop thinking like it's black and white and just got to look into the data and see what the data says. In the next video I'm going to give you my top 5 favorite banks as well as credit unions that do not charge insufficient funds or overdraft fees. All right, that's it, guys. Go down in the comments, like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and I'll check you guys out in the next video. All right, peace.